Vertcoin is a digital currency just like Bitcoin or Litecoin, with a major difference. It is the best. Yes, I said it. It is decentralized, will stay decentralized, and therefore be the coin of the people and not the evil banks. Vertcoin.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back. This is and we are the Vertcoin Core. Today is February 13th, 2022. Be sure to smash that like, leave a comment below, and of course, subscribe if you haven't done so already. Market cap 20 million, volume 151,000, circulating supply 63,482,000 Vertcoin. It leaves just under 21 million Vertcoin to be mined. That's the entire maximum supply of Bitcoin. 21 million Vertcoin, still up for grabs. GPUs only. Currently the price is 32 cents, 765 Satoshis against a Bitcoin value of 42,000 green paper planes. Alright, we have a pretty long video ahead, so I pulled up the chart here against USD, only really to say sayonara to our beloved purple box range, which we left and haven't been back into since the end of last year. Previously, the longest time we were away from it was right here, April and May. We were out of it for like a month to the upside. And that's the current situation. Let's go. It's time for the first ever Vertcoin Core tweet of the week. Today's winner, coincidentally and appropriately, is the official Vertcoin Twitter page, coming in with this tweet: 86 likes, 31 total retweets. Electrum VTC is back. Thanks to the work of Virchin, a dedicated community team member, Electrum VTC is back again and ready for use as a light wallet. Thanks to the Vertcoin community for running servers too. You can download Electrum VTC from here. I know Electrum has been a very popular desktop wallet among the Vertcoin community. I personally have never used it, but if the Vertcoin community likes it as much as they do, there must be a good reason. If you consume digital currency content at all, which I'll assume you do, you're without a doubt familiar with this government official, the reigning boogeyman of the cryptocurrency space, SEC Chairman Gary Gensler. Those of you that have been with the channel for a while might remember he was the subject of a video I did back in April. In that video, we explored Mr. Gensler's close connection to key Vertcoin developers through their involvement with the Digital Currency Initiative at MIT. Today, we're going to take a more detailed look into that connection while trying to establish a better understanding of Mr. Gensler's overall position on cryptocurrency, as well as their common concerns, goals, and values. Additionally, I've arranged the content in a way that serves to progressively educate newcomers and crypto vets alike. Some of these clips may seem a bit lengthy, but the information is outstanding, and it's worth noting that the full videos have a combined runtime of about 4 hours. We're going to start with a piece of Mr. Gensler's introduction to his course on blockchain and money. I'm just going to let these play through, and I'll pop in between clips. Enjoy.
And we'll talk about ledgers, particularly next week, but we'll talk about ledgers all throughout this course and how it changes the world of finance. Now, it's secured by cryptography, because cryptography, remember, is communications and making sure adversaries can't pick you off. We're going to learn about hash functions. And hash functions are a really important part of cryptography, and initially for databases and how to search and store information in databases. But in this circumstances, hash functions were the way to not only append the next block to the prior blocks, but really importantly, to compress data, to make it more manipulatable, and to verify it. And as I've written here, tamper resistance and the integrity. Digital signatures, which has to do the public key, private key cryptography. And then consensus. So there's a really important part of blockchain is how do you decide who appends that next block? Because when I went back here, there's block and block. Each of these blocks, somebody has to decide who appends, who gets to pick the next block. And that's what's called consensus protocol. And there's wide debates about consensus protocol. And we'll talk a lot about consensus protocol. But in essence, it addresses something, a term called the cost of trust. And we'll talk about Byzantine generals problems, which is another reading. The Byzantine generals problem was laid out as a sort of mathematical game theory issue some 30-ish years ago. That's what Satoshi Nakamoto solved, was this last part, the Byzantine generals problem.
For reference, the Byzantine general's problem describes the difficulty decentralized systems have in agreeing on a single truth. The Byzantine general's problem plagued money for millennia until the invention of Bitcoin. Bitcoin uses a proof-of-work mechanism and a blockchain to solve the Byzantine general's problem. Bitcoin's rule set is objective, so there is no disagreement about which blocks or transactions are valid, allowing all members to agree on a single truth. Next, we'll join our common link Neha Narula as she features Mr. Gensler in a conversation about the need for and purpose of cryptocurrency regulation.
Hello, everyone. I'm here today. My name is Neha Narula, and I'm the director of the Digital Currency Initiative here at the MIT Media Lab. And I am here with Gary Gensler, who is a senior advisor to the MIT Media Lab and a senior lecturer at Sloan, former chairman of the CFTC, and also Patrick Merck, who is a fellow at the Harvard Berkman Center, also a lawyer at Cooley, and basically a Bitcoin OG. He was the executive director of the Bitcoin Foundation, one of the non-corrupt ones. But we're here today to talk about regulation in the cryptocurrency space. So Gary, I want to start with you because you've been making some headlines this week. Why don't you give a summary of sort of what you've been saying and what's been going on?
Well, thank you, Neha, and it's great to be with Patrick. What I really think is there's a great potential for blockchain technology. It's already in its 9.5 years since Satoshi wrote his paper, brought some real changes underneath the hood of the world of finance. But I think for further adoption, to move to the next stage, basically, we really need to bring it inside the tent of public policy frameworks. We should be tech neutral. As societies, though, we've benefited for decades from ensuring that people pay their taxes. We've benefited to ensure that people don't fund terrorists. And yes, we've benefited from basic investor protections that came out of the Great Depression. I know that blockchain technology and much of its excitement is about disrupting centralized authorities, disrupting the incumbents. And I think that is terrific. And the incumbents, no, I really do. I think that the incumbents and centralized authorities, centralized institutions in the financial sector, while they've fostered a lot of economic growth, they've also challenged economic growth. And we've had crisis after crisis after crisis. We've had a lot of abuse. Consumers need to be protected, of course. And then the cost of the financial sector captures what's called economic rents, because they have a sort of a centrality that they can collect more dollars or euros or shekels or yen from the public. So I think that the disruptive nature of blockchain technology is terrific, but I think at some stage, why should it be, for instance, unregulated startup crypto exchanges that are serving the public and not some traditional exchanges? So there's a little bit of a unlevel playing field right now.
So a few things that I'd like to say to respond to you guys. So first of all, sort of, Patrick, what you're saying about a dialogue, right? I think what was really important for me was I was coming into this knowing nothing about financial regulation really, other than it seemed very onerous. It seemed sort of like, oh, it has all these things you require that clearly don't make sense anymore.
And you want to stay away from it.
I want to stay away from it. There's all these things that it requires that just don't even make sense in this new world. How silly. We can't really, we just need to kind of put that over there, and we need to figure out how this technology should work, right? And in conversations with you, Gary, I've sort of come to realize, well, there are some higher level public policy goals that are important. Investor protection is important. Market integrity is important. And I think we all sort of agree that we want these things as a society, right? The question is how to get them. And I think that's where you and I differ a bit. But I've come a little, closer to thinking, okay, maybe the regulators aren't the bad guys. And also, we've been having a lot of conversations with people at the SEC and the CFTC, and I have just been so impressed by a lot of those people. And Patrick, I know you have talked to a lot of them as well. They are your former colleagues, Gary, right? And I've been so impressed with their desire to really understand the technology and to really work with it.
Through this exchange, we can ascertain that his primary concern is not for the well-being of the existing financial establishment, but for the fairness and security of nascent financial systems. Next, we'll about face with Neha Narula, and she'll explain to us what the Digital Currency Initiative is and introduce some familiar faces.
So it's my job to tell you about the DCI, the Digital Currency Initiative. We were founded in 2015, and the origin story is pretty interesting. It actually sort of kind of came out of the demise of what was then called the Bitcoin Foundation. So at the time, there were 3 developers who were working on open source software at the Bitcoin Foundation who were out of a job. And luckily, MIT was able to step in and was able to hire them and formed what is now the Digital Currency Initiative around that. So these 3 developers spent all their time working on Bitcoin. 2 of them are still with us today, Vladimir Vanderlaan and Corey Fields. They still work on Bitcoin. Unfortunately, neither of them were able to join us for this live stream, but hopefully we'll have them on at another time. There will be many more of these. And what we do at MIT is we do research and we convene and we teach classes and we educate. So a couple of examples of those types of things. The things we try to do are work on some of the sort of fundamental problems that still remain in the cryptocurrency space. Scalability, privacy, security are sort of the main things. We collaborate with people across MIT from Sloan, the economics department, and the computer science school. Which is really great. And we love working with students and faculty and researchers from all those different places. We also teach classes. So if you check out our website at dci.mit.edu, you can go look at some of the classes we've taught. We've tried to film all of them. So you'll see things like cryptocurrency engineering and design, which Taj and I taught together. And that's also posted on OCW. You'll see links to a class at Sloan called Blockchain and Money. And you'll see a little bit about some of our lab classes that we've taught too. And even a class on ethics. So we even taught a class called Blockchain Ethics, where we tried to look at some of the design choices that people were making as they were building this software to think a little bit more critically about it. So that's a start. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through, everybody's going to tell you what they do, and that hopefully will give you an idea of everything that is going on at the DCI. So let's get started.
So thanks, Neha. So I'll coordinate a bit as we hop between our colleagues. And so first up is Gertjaap. Gertjaap, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Hi, everyone. So my name is Gertjaap. I'm a software developer. My background is in computer science. I started working with the DCI in April of 2018. I've been a software developer for around 20 years. I started working in cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology around 2017. I started being really interested in specializing in that field, and that led to me working with the DCI. When I started at the DCI, I was working on layer 2 protocols like the Lightning Network. I worked on discrete log contracts, and currently I'm working on a project called Pool Detective, which is an interesting project that looks into the behavior of mining pools on Bitcoin and various other cryptocurrencies.
Gertjaap will go further into detail about Pool Detective later on in the episode. Stick around. It's a really interesting look into the current nature and potential future security improvements to proof of work. From here, the host goes on to introduce other members of the chat, but we'll skip ahead to the other half of our dynamic duo.
Thanks, Dan. And now over to James. James, can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks, Wasim. Hi, everyone. I'm James Lovejoy. I'm a master's student with the DCI. I've been working with the DCI since I think spring 2015 now, since my spring freshman year. I work currently on researching 51% attacks. So specifically, we built a system to track a bunch of like 20 different cryptocurrencies and to figure out when 51% attacks are happening and to detect and report double spends. In the past, I've worked on things like Lightning with Taj, and also a project called CryptoKernel, which I did before, which was a sort of blockchain software development kit. And so outside the DCI, I work on a altcoin called Vertcoin.
Thanks, James. And we're back over to Neha to round off.
Yeah, thanks. So James joined the DCI, I think around when I did. So he's been here the whole time. He just never went away, just kept on. So if you're an MIT student, that could be you next year, if you're interested in working with the DCI, all the way from freshman year up to MEng. So I introduced the DCI, but let me introduce myself. My name is Neha Narula, and I, like Madar's, also went to grad school at MIT. So I've been here a while, and my PhD was in databases and distributed systems. I graduated in 2015. Before my PhD, I worked as a software engineer at Google. But when I graduated, I hadn't done anything in the Bitcoin space at all, anything in the cryptocurrency space. But I think 2015 was around the time that there was a lot of arguments about block size and how to scale blockchains. And I was really interested in the scalability of distributed systems. And so I started reading more about these systems, and I started learning more about how they work, and learning all about what people saw in them and what they thought they might be able to build on top of them. And that was really exciting to me. And then I also started reading about how our monetary system actually works and the history of money, and how that's evolved over time. And everything was just so fascinating. I went very deeply down a rabbit hole, which I think a lot of people do, and got super interested in the space, and then met the folks who were then working at the Digital Currency Initiative. Some folks kind of alluded to this, but I think it's really important that we have folks who don't have a financial interest in a specific coin or token or platform winning to work in the space. So that's us at the DCI. Most of us don't have large cryptocurrency holdings. None of us advise ICOs or companies. We haven't started our own coins. And I think we've all been really deliberate about that. And we've done that on purpose because we want to be able to work on the technology and evaluate the technology from a neutral standpoint. So when we say, this is what we've chosen to work on, or this is what we think, that that's not coming from a place where we have a financial stake in the outcome of what decision you might make. And so that lets us work on things like digital fiat currency, like what Rob and I are doing. And it also lets us work on the open source cryptocurrency systems. I think something else that's a little bit unique about the DCI is if you go to our website and click our About page, you can see our values. And so the values of MIT, like the slogan is, I think it's mens et manus, which is mind and hand. So it's about obviously being intellectual and thinking with your brain and thinking through ideas, but also being very hands-on and actually building things. And so we like to do that at the DCI too. Research is not just thinking and writing papers, so that is a huge part of it. It's also writing software. And so that's why it's important that we get our hands dirty working on real world software systems. And by working on things like Bitcoin, I at least have learned a tremendous amount about how cryptocurrencies actually operate and what are some of the maybe, more non-intuitive issues with them. And so that's been some of the work that I've been doing more recently. With James and with Hertyap and with Dan Aronoff, is sort of thinking about the underlying security of proof of work systems, really trying to get down into the fundamentals. And so James is wrapping up his thesis right now. It's due on Monday and is graduating, but his work on monitoring proof of work coins, I think, is really informative, and we can't wait to share that with everybody. And we're definitely going to do a session just on proof of work security later on, which hopefully people will find interesting. So that's my introduction. Wasim, what is next? What are we doing?
Sure, we've got a couple of questions that we can roll to, some easy ones, which is always a nice place to start. I thought that you mentioned the values, so I've just brought them up on my computer, so I thought we could just mention them, which are to serve the public good, to have real-world impact, to act with integrity and rigor, to have the courage to rethink everything from the ground up, and to challenge everything and be fearless. So I think those are pretty good mottos to live by in work or in play.
I let that clip play on so that everyone can take note of the fact that though we can draw connections and make whatever assumptions are left to be made, these institutions have to mind their educational and professional integrity, and therefore can't seem to support any particular cryptocurrency project over another. But all of what she says here is fact as far as I know. Most of them, I'm sure, don't have large cryptocurrency holdings, not to speculate on the size of James or Gert's bags. And as we know, James didn't create Vertcoin, he took over lead developers sometime after it was created. Also, I wanted you guys to come away with an idea of the kind of values that we see translated into Vertcoin development and embraced by the Vertcoin community. Alright, let's get into the good stuff. Here we'll take a closer look at proof of work security, the issues it faces, and some of the programs being developed to combat them.
today we are focusing on a more specific topic. We are going to talk about the economic security of proof of work, a very important topic. So I am joined today by my colleagues. So first of all, we have James Lovejoy, who just finished his master's at MIT and is actually graduating later today. So hi, James.
Wait, hello.
Then we have Gert-Jaap Glasbergen, who is a software engineer who works with the DCI and has done some really cool work monitoring mining pools, which he's going to tell you about. So, Gert-Jaap. And then last but not least, we have Daniel Morose. Dan is a PhD student at Harvard in computer science. His advisor is David Parks and does some really cool work in algorithmic game theory. So, say hi, Dan.
Hey, everyone.
Yay, great. Okay, so let's get started. So what is proof of work? Let's start there. It's mining. It's the computational puzzles that the miners have to solve in order to produce blocks that are part of a cryptocurrency's blockchain. Proof of work secures over $200 billion in coin market cap right now. So I point this out because I know that there are lots of other new consensus protocols that are being developed and being experimented with and are even out there in production. But proof of work is still pretty important, I would say. It's still pretty critical. And the security of proof of work is based on a majority of miners following the protocol and always mining the heaviest chain. Sometimes we say longest chain, but what we really mean is the heaviest chain, not just the one with the most blocks, but the one with the most work. So next slide. Satoshi actually wrote about this in the Bitcoin white paper. Satoshi addressed the question of, are miners actually incentivized to always mine on the heaviest chain, or might it be in their interest to not do that occasionally? Because you see, if a miner doesn't do that, and if they mine on another chain in secret, then they can do an attack that's called a double spend attack, where they might spend some coins to someone and receive goods in exchange for those coins. And then that transaction will get buried in the chain under some proof of work, under some blocks. And the person that they're trading with will have released whatever it is that they were buying with those coins. And then the attacker could mine another chain that spends that money in a different way, maybe back to themselves, and then reveal that chain later. It has more proof of work. Everyone switches to that chain. And in effect, the person who is trading with the attacker gets ripped off. They don't have the coins, and they also don't have whatever it was they were trading to the attacker. Now, when Satoshi talked about this, Satoshi said for the miner, he ought to find it more profitable to play by the rules, such rules that favor him with more new coins than everyone else combined. Because you see, miners are rewarded with new coins whenever they find a block and whenever that block is actually included in the longest chain. So the idea here is Satoshi is surmising that miners will really, find it in their interest to just mine on the heaviest chain, to not do this type of double spend attack. But actually, this is a really interesting economic question. Depending on how much an attacker could double spend, maybe it's not always in their interest to do this. And what happens if an attacker does do this? Does the coin's value collapse? Because it kind of means that, if you can do it once, you can probably do it again, and then people are just going to get double spend all over the place. And so what does that really mean? And so that's some of the stuff that we're going to cover in today's live stream. Next slide. So the question really is here, how secure is proof of work? There's this kind of hand-wavy argument in the original Bitcoin white paper about why it might work. There's been some really interesting work since then looking at the economic security of proof of work, and we might talk about some of that. And really that work is kind of scary. It sort of finds that based on the fact that miners get rewards no matter what, it might actually be pretty cheap to do an attack if you can get access to the hash rate to do an attack. There actually have been attacks on a handful of smaller coins in practice. So we've actually seen double spend attacks in the wild, and we'll talk about some of those. But for Bitcoin, at least, and most of the larger proof of work chains, we've been so far so good for the past 10 years. So, if history says anything, it's that Bitcoin seems pretty secure. It's been 10 years and we haven't seen a double spend attack with a pretty significant rewrite of the chain. An example of a double spend attack is the following, and I described it a little bit at the beginning. We agree on a transaction where I send you Bitcoin and you give me US dollars, let's say. I broadcast that transaction sending you the Bitcoin. So I sign a transaction that moves the Bitcoin to an address you have given me. You wait for K block confirmations, maybe 6. And then once you see those K block confirmations, you give me the US dollars because you're like, okay, this is buried 6 blocks deep. This transaction probably can't be reversed, so I'm going to give you the USD. Then I, very sneakily, create a heavier chain on the side, which double spends that original output that I gave to you back to me. And I release the heavier chain. And everyone, according to the default behavior of the Bitcoin software, will switch to that heavier chain, and thus the ledger will reflect the fact that I have the Bitcoin and not you. And actually, I have the USD and the Bitcoin because you already gave me the USD, so I could run away with that. Next slide has a few examples of double spends on smaller proof of work chains. This actually is a little bit out of date. It's from almost 10 months ago. There's been more. And James is going to go next, and he is going to tell you a little bit about a system that we built to detect reorgs and some of the data that he has found. So James, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, thank you, Neha. So yeah, as Neha said, we built a system to study these double spend attacks that we had reports were happening in the wild. But previously, we were reliant on the exchanges or the victims more generally, as well as journalists to report on these attacks, to learn about them. There was no deployed infrastructure that was publicly available where people could get empirical data on the frequency of attacks, which transactions are involved, and so on. So this first slide here is just a diagram showing what the reorg tracker is actually looking for and what it stores. So Neha was talking about double spend attacks. And essentially what happens is the attacker is making a private chain that they construct in secret and then wait until it has more work than the existing chain, and then they release it in one go. So what you have here is the sort of normal operation where you have blocks that are contiguous. They just lead on from one another. But then what happens in a reorg event is a new set of blocks is added that is an alternative fork from the main sort of linear chain. And the reorg tracker's job is to store the original blocks, so the blocks that were part of the main chain to start with, the set of blocks that replaced those original blocks, and then also the fork block, so the block that is common between the two forks. So on the next slide, we have a diagram of the reorg tracker itself. So essentially what it involves is a database which stores all these blocks, and then a set of coin daemons for each of the coins that we tracked. And we tracked 23 different coins. So for each coin, we have a coin daemon and a tracker process, which constantly is pinging that coin daemon to check what the current tip block is. And if it sees that that has changed, it attempts to resolve whether it's a sort of contiguous addition to the chain or whether or not it's a fork, and then tries to, or does save the data for both sides of the fork. Once that's done, it analyzes both sides of the fork for the transactions contained within it in order to determine which, if any, of the transactions have been double spent. Finally, we had a sort of web API, which I guess we can demo a little bit later, that correlates historical price data as well as data from hash rate rental markets like NiceHash to estimate how much the reorg would have cost to perpetrate and sort of how much the value of the double spends were. The other interesting thing we found was the potential involvement of rental markets, specifically NiceHash, in launching some of the attacks. So on the next slide, we have the NiceHash rental market for Vertcoin's hashing algorithm during the time of the deep reorg event. And what you see is a large spike in price of the hash rate, and also the available capacity on the network coinciding with the start and the end of the reorg. So this sort of highly suggests that NiceHash was used in some way to gather the hash rate required to use the attack.
Some will remember that prior to the release of Verthash, Vertcoin's new mining algorithm, the Vertcoin team asked NiceHash not to support it in order to prevent bad actors from utilizing that service to attack the network in the future. I covered this in a video as well last January titled Parting Ways with NiceHash.
As a miner, so if I were a miner at home, let's say an honest one who wanted to just, mine my cryptocurrency, how do I check up on my mining pool? Maybe this question will actually get answered a little bit later with HurtYap stuff, but maybe you could give kind of a preview of what's to come.
Yeah, I mean, checking up on your mining pool is actually, I would say, probably pretty difficult. I mean, for a normal user, if you're just reading the log output from your miner, you're not really receiving much information there. You might be able to see the block header, perhaps, that you're referencing. But beyond that, it's pretty tough. I mean, I know, one strategy people use is they just, try and make sure that the amount that they're receiving from the pool sort of meets their expectation. But even then, you can, because the variance is still quite high, I'm sure a pool could fudge it to a certain extent and, take off a couple percentage points here and there, and people probably wouldn't notice.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear about how hard it was for miners to actually check and see what's going on. Hopefully that'll be different with Stratum V2. So HurtYap, why don't we turn to you and you can tell us about what's called Pool Detective.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So, we started to work on what we call the Pool Detective last summer. And the idea behind the project is that mining pools are essentially in control of what miners do. So as soon as you connect your miner to a mining pool, then the mining pool decides what your miner is working on. And what we thought was that it might be interesting to build a system that monitors what these mining pools do. So the reason people use mining pools, for those that don't know, is that if you're mining just by yourself and your hash power compared to the rest of the network is a very tiny fraction, then like even for instance, if you have a super state-of-the-art Bitcoin miner that you just bought off the internet, it can take you like 30 years before you find a Bitcoin block. So mining by yourself seems to be difficult. So what a mining pool allows you to do is to pool your resources. So add your miner to the mining pool's resources, and then you share the workload, but you also share the rewards. And so the mining pool coordinates the work, distributes it to the miners, and then custodies the block rewards and distributes them under the miners that use the pool. And there's a protocol in use which is called Stratum. And just to show how much power pools have, you can see that 80% of the hash rate that's currently active on the Bitcoin network runs through 8 mining pools. So that's essentially 8 companies or people that control 80% of the Bitcoin hash rate through their systems by instructing the actual miners on what they need to do. So they have a large role in that sense. And mining hardware is essentially not very smart. So what mining hardware is really good at is crunching out proof of work functions as quickly as possible using as low energy as possible. And so it's not wasting any energy on understanding whether the work it's getting is actually correct. And so if a mining pool sends a miner work that's technically correct, so the miner can work on it, but if you analyze the work, it's not what you expect it to do, then the mining hardware will still do it. And so that's a challenge, because that means that mining pools essentially control a large set of devices that are not like we think are not actively monitored on what their instructions are. And so there's a risk that the mining hardware just does whatever the pool tells it to do. And the unexpected behavior that we are looking for is, for instance, selfish mining, where the mining pool finds a new block but doesn't tell the peer-to-peer network, it only tells its miners, meaning that the miners are capable of finding the next block without competition because none of the other mining pools are aware that they have found a block. Another thing that a mining pool can do is to mine on a chain that you don't expect it to mine on. For instance, there's cryptocurrencies that share the proof of work function. And so, for instance, Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, and I think also Litecoin Cash all share the same SHA-256 proof of work function. And so if you send a end miner that can do SHA-256 a Bitcoin block or a Bitcoin Cash block or a Bitcoin SV block, it wouldn't tell the difference. And so a mining pool can send you work for a chain that you don't expect. There's a benefit because you can also do like profit switching and just mine on whatever chain is most profitable at the time. But if you expect the chain, or if you expect the pool to give you work for the Bitcoin BTC chain, then it can send you other work without you really noticing. And so there's three other things, smaller things like mining empty blocks, concealing your true hash rate. And the last thing is underpaying miners. So one of the things that mining pools are trusted to do correctly is to account for how much work each miner does and then distribute the rewards accordingly to each individual miner's contribution. But the problem is the only person who can check that calculation under some of the distribution mechanisms is the mining pool itself. There's no way to check if something goes wrong.
And the economic reality is much more centralized. Protocols, ownership of the tokens, mining, of course, are somewhat centralized, and then the secondary markets.
Yeah, so it brings me to a whole nother area, which is mining. Do you think mining today is centralized or decentralized?
Well, it somewhat depends on the token, but there's clusters of centralization. Though I haven't looked at the recent statistics, I think 3 or maybe just 2 mining pools represent over 50% of Bitcoin mining. Usually it's 2 or 3 mining pools that represent about half of the Ethereum. And it's 10 or 12 mining pools that represent about 95% of the mining. And amongst those top 3, I guess 2 are in China and 1's in Russia, so that's kind of an interesting observation as well.
So you're saying I put my money on stuff being mined in Russia and Asia? Yeah.
That would be one way to put it, yes, yeah.
Final question. What's your favorite or a project that you admire and just think is particularly interesting in this space?
MIT's Digital Currency Initiative. So I've got to come back to the home base.
Perfect.
Home base. I think what Nehat and Taj and the others have put together is great.
Yeah, you built an incredible thing, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.